We've got even more NFL trade targets in this video. Of course, if you have been watching the channel, you know that I posted a video like this nearly a week ago. So if you haven't checked that one out, make sure to go do so. It covers 5 other trade targets that I think are potentially going to be on the move. One of them already got traded to a team I talked about in Christian McCaffrey getting dealt to the San Francisco 49ers. I highlighted that as a very likely move, and a couple days later it happened. So let's jump into it more. Let's see if I can predict a few more NFL trades. Hopefully you guys have been enjoying the content. If you do enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like and also subscribe to the channel for more. And let's get into it here now with a video preview. What are we looking at? Well, we're going to talk about NFL trade candidates, obviously. We're going to talk about what teams I could see potentially be interested in these players. And we're also going to talk about potential compensation. What could these teams net back for the players that they are trading away? Again, it's not very typical that you see a lot of in-season NFL trades. We've already had quite a few this year. Deion Jones, Robbie Anderson, Christian McCaffrey, a lot of talent changing hands during the season, which does lend itself to some challenges. Players have to learn the new playbooks and adjust to a new team. So we'll see if there's more moves in the works. I think that there definitely could be. So we're going to talk about a few more moves that I think could happen. And we're going to start out with the Chicago Bears as candidate number 1. And I have 4 players here in candidate number 1. So we're going to look at a lot of players in this video. And the players I see the Chicago Bears potentially looking to move. First of all, David Montgomery, the running back there. We saw him go down earlier in the season. Khalil Herbert really filled his shoes well. I know a lot of NFL fantasy players really enjoyed owning Khalil Herbert as the RB2 there, the handcuff to David Montgomery. And he found a lot of success while Montgomery was out. Of course, Montgomery's now healthy and could help another team if the Bears do decide, hey, this isn't our year. Right now, we're just kind of struggling. We're 3rd in the NFC North, but it's not because we're good. It's more so because the Lions have lost more games than us than anything. Maybe moving Montgomery right now is the right thing to do. Give the workload to Khalil Herbert, try and get another draft pick in the door. Robert Quinn, an edge that I think could make some noise somewhere else, especially on a contending team. I think there's going to be a lot of good teams interested in acquiring him, especially if the price is right. And Eddie Jackson, a safety who a few years ago looked like he was about to light the league on fire, has so many takeaways. Was kind of the Trayvon Diggs of the secondary, except he was more reliable in coverage even than Trayvon Diggs was at certain points last year where he was getting torched down the field a little bit. Eddie Jackson was really good, but he was making a ton of other plays as well, intercepting the football, and was just really a timely player for them, especially when the Bears had initially gotten Khalil Mack. It just looked like, hey, they have the secondary in place. They now have the pass rush. Things have gone sour there really quickly, and I think Eddie Jackson, if you put him into the right situation, can maybe make more plays like we saw a few years ago. He is a little bit older now, but still an impact player, I think, at the NFL level, and someone who can help a contending team, just like we talked about with Robert Quinn. Then Roquan Smith here, linebacker who demanded a trade earlier in the season, hasn't gotten his wish up to this point, but it's very clear that Ryan Poles, the new GM there in Chicago, just doesn't value him the same way that the previous regime did when they took Roquan Smith in the top 15 picks of the NFL draft. At this point, Roquan probably not going to be a long-term fixture with the Bears. I could see them franchise tagging him and keeping him around, especially since the franchise tag for an interior linebacker is typically not too expensive. So there's a good chance that Roquan Smith does stay with the Bears. I don't think that they have to force a trade here at this point, but I think that they should consider it, especially if they aren't planning on getting a long-term deal done with the star linebacker. So let's look at some teams that could maybe be interested. I think David Montgomery going to the Los Angeles Rams makes perfect sense. The Rams missed out on CMC, and they saw a division rival bring him in. David Montgomery is not a Christian McCaffrey level player. I think we all know that, but he is an improvement for them, especially since they've been struggling to run the football this year a bit. Cam Akers likely going to be on his way out. He was in my previous video. Again, make sure to go check that one out if you haven't. But David Montgomery, I think, could be a nice little upgrade for them, and it's not going to cost them too much. I think probably an early day 3 selection, something like a 4th or 5th round pick. Maybe you throw in a 7th in there to get a deal done if you really need to, or a future 7th, potentially a swap in there. Maybe they give up, hey, here's our 4th this year and our 6th. You guys give us a 7th. I think something along those lines is probably enough value to get David Montgomery. And I think it's a worthwhile move for the Bears. I think that they need to make some changes. And I think Khalil Herbert can give you a good percentage of what Montgomery already gives you. And you get to bring in extra draft compensation instead of just having 2 solid running backs. You just transition to 1 and, try and go back to the draft later and figure some things out. Robert Quinn, Kansas City Chiefs, I think that makes the most sense. Matt Nagy, has a relationship there, obviously, with Chicago, used to be the head coach there. There has been some changing of the guard, but Ryan Poles, look at where he came from, Kansas City. Very likely that we could see these two teams talking, especially around the trade deadline. And I think a player that could really help the Kansas City Chiefs is Robert Quinn. You look at the specific situation right now, they have Chris Jones, Frank Clark. They need another edge rusher. They've always needed another edge rusher, and I think Robert Quinn could really suffice in that role for them, kind of really cementing their front four. And he would be a really good addition off the edge with some speed, but also can win with power. The Chiefs need to get better with their edge play. I think that there's a serious need for them, especially if they do want to compete with the Buffalo Bills this year. Those two teams are very close right now, and Robert Quinn might just be the needle, might be the player, that moves the needle for this team and could really take a huge step forward for that defense. We know how much Spagnuolo loves to send pressure. He blitzes a ton with exotic looks and really trusts his cornerbacks one-on-one. They run the second most man coverage in the NFL in the last 5 years. There's no coincidence to that. But having a pass rusher here in Robert Quinn who could maybe help you win without having to send pressure probably would be beneficial for any team, but specifically the Chiefs here just with their style of play. Then Eddie Jackson, I have him going to the Bills here. Again, the Bills, a team that I think is going to be in a spot looking to contend. And for Eddie Jackson, they might not have to give up that much, maybe a round 5 or 6 selection only, just given his age and contract situation right now. And to get a safety in the door that, hey, we lost Micah Hyde for the season. That's got to be the way that they're looking at themselves. Saran Neal's played really well this year. I don't think a lot of people really know who Saran Neal is unless you're a Bills fan. He's really filled in well. He's been a great special teamer in the past for Buffalo, and he has filled in. But I think Eddie Jackson kind of gives you that playmaking element that they've lost a little bit with Micah Hyde out. So bring him in. Again, it's a cheap, low buy move right now to get a player who I think can actually really help you once we get into, December, January, pushing for a Super Bowl. I think Eddie Jackson could be an impact player. And then Roquan Smith here, I didn't see any great options out there right now. I think the one that makes the most sense to me is Tennessee. They badly need another linebacker there. I think that putting a linebacker behind Jeffrey Simmons, who can really help in the run game, but is also adequate in the pass game like Roquan Smith is, could be really deadly for that team, especially right now, given the fact that they lead that division. If they're able to make a buy now move like Roquan Smith, it could really help them cement the AFC South for themselves. But where they're at right now, I'm not exactly sure if I see a deal getting done for Roquan Smith. It would probably take a day 2 selection. I would be surprised if a day 1 selection was involved for Roquan. But if they find a way to make a move like that, get a linebacker right in the center of his prime. I also thought about Seattle. Obviously, they moved off of Bobby Wagner. Maybe they could look at themselves and say, hey, Roquan would be a really nice replacement there. Could really help us in the middle of our defense. I'm not sure as well. They're 3-3 tied for that division at the time I'm recording this. Obviously, there's going to be some games that play out. We'll have a better look on how that NFC West looks, but maybe Roquan Smith to Seattle could make some sense as well for a day 2 selection. Candidate number 2, Chase Claypool of the Pittsburgh Steelers. There's been a lot of rumors going on about Chase Claypool and the fact that, hey, his targets just aren't there this year. He hasn't been getting as many touches as I think a lot of people would like to see him get. And it just makes sense right now for both sides to maybe move on. Claypool looked like such an electric, good young player, especially first couple of years in the league. And it's just kind of faded a little bit. Similar to what happened with Juju Smith-Schuster. Remember his first couple of years, you thought, oh man, this might be one of the next top 5, top 10 receivers in the NFL just based on his production when he was next to Antonio Brown. It didn't pan out that way. Chase Claypool wasn't as hyped up as Juju, but there was a lot of expectations for him after a really stellar rookie season. And I don't think he's lived up to that either at this point. So I could see Pittsburgh moving off of him, just like they did with Juju Smith-Schuster. And at this point, teams that I think are going to be interested in making a move for Claypool, and you're going to see these teams' names pop up a lot anytime you're talking about a wide receiver. The Green Bay Packers, they could use a big body guy like Chase Claypool. But the one thing I really like that he could add to that team, he gives you an option to, kind of run some of those wide receiver end arounds, get him the ball short, and he can make some plays happen. We saw Romeo Doubs already, one of the better run after catch receivers right now in the league in terms of his actual statistical production. At this point, I think that Chase Claypool could be another option for Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, having Lazard has been really helpful for them because that's their deep threat guy. That's who Rodgers likes to air it out to. But there's no denying that Green Bay could still use another wide receiver. Again, for Claypool here, we're probably looking at a day 3 selection to some extent. I'm not exactly sure what the value would be for him at this point. I would think round 4 or 5 at the very high end, but I could even see him getting moved for a round 6 selection. The Bears, again, a team that they need more options there for Justin Fields. help him in short yardage, get him a guy who can win after the catch. And Chase Claypool does that. He's very hard to tackle. He's a big body receiver. The Titans, hey, they traded AJ Brown. Treylon Burks is injured. If they are trying to make that push, Claypool could make sense for them. And the Giants, I've talked about the Giants a ton for wide receiver options. You just need somebody to be better than David Sills. And there's a lot of options out there right now that could be better than David Sills. The Giants are 5-1 at the time I'm recording this, and they're looking to take a step forward and really continue to build this offense. I think Claypool could definitely be a good option for them. But if I had to guess right now, my favorite to land him would actually be the Green Bay Packers, although I'm not sold that Pittsburgh's going to even move him at this point. I think there's a lot of like hearsay about this where, hey, Pittsburgh's going to look to move him. I think they're fielding a lot of calls right now, but ultimately they might decide, just based on where they drafted him, the packages they're getting are just not good enough to trade a player like Claypool at this point of his career. Then candidate number 3, a player who I think should get traded this year, Brandin Cooks of the Houston Texans. Obviously, a lot of people were really excited about him coming into fantasy this year, and he hasn't performed as well as I think a lot of people expected. Part of that is Davis Mills. Part of that is the Houston Texans just aren't that good at football. But I think he could be really impactful on a contending team, which is why we're going to see the receiver list here get trimmed down a bit to 2 teams. 2 teams that I think have a legitimate chance to win the Super Bowl if they added a Brandin Cooks level player and things start to go right for them. One is the Green Bay Packers. Yes, they're 3-3 at the time I'm recording this. There are a few games back in the Minnesota Vikings in the division. Doesn't look super likely, but you give Aaron Rodgers a receiver of Brandin Cooks caliber, probably see him get traded for a round 2 or round 3 selection. It's a massive upgrade over what they currently have, even over Allen Lazard. Brandin Cooks would be the best wide receiver on the team on day one. I can't say the same thing about Chase Claypool there in Green Bay. And for Tampa, he wouldn't be the best wide receiver, but we've seen him find success with Tom Brady in the past. Think about when he was traded from the Saints to the Patriots. Brandin Cooks was electric for that Patriots offense with Tom Brady throwing him the football. Could see Tampa right now. They've had so many injuries at wide receiver. I don't think wide receiver is an actual need if they were healthy, but Chris Godwin, Julio Jones, it's hard to rely on them week to week just with how their injuries have kind of played out. If the Buccaneers really want to improve their chances at winning the division this year, which is not something I was expecting to say here heading into week 7, just looking at the fact that, hey, the Buccaneers have a lot more talent on their roster than the Falcons and the Saints, in my opinion, and they really haven't pulled away in that division is kind of concerning to me. But Brandin Cooks could definitely be someone who helps them down the stretch. We know he's a veteran. He knows a lot of different schemes and plays in the NFL. I think he's going to be someone who would adjust well to a playbook change during the year, better than most, in my opinion, just because he's already had to change playbooks so many times in his career. And I think the Buccaneers definitely would make sense for Cooks just at this point. Candidate number 4, we're talking about 2 Denver Broncos here. And these are 2 players who I was not expecting to see on the trade block potentially this year. Bradley Chubb, someone who's a former top 10 pick, was supposed to be one of the best edges in the NFL. I don't think he's really lived up to that up to this point. He's had some health issues as well, but when he plays, he is a good edge. There's no question about that. And then Jerry Jeudy, a player who out of Alabama looked like was going to be one of the most electric players in the NFL. Obviously, the Jeudy was such a big part of his game. He just looked so dynamic after the catch, and he was so good at creating separation on in-breaking routes across the middle of the field. We just haven't seen that Jerry Jeudy in the NFL. He's made some really big plays. He's had a bevy of 50-plus yard touchdowns, but the consistency and the regularity just hasn't been there. Part of that was the QBs he had throwing to him, and maybe you could argue that part of that this year is still that he's had Russell Wilson throwing to him, but I think Jerry Jeudy could be one of the best options to go trade for this season. For Bradley Chubb, I'm looking at a few teams here. The Philadelphia Eagles, there's no denying that they've been looking for an edge rusher. I think Chubb could make a lot of sense there. The Seattle Seahawks, they've been targeting pass rushers for the last 4 or 5 years. You know, they've been trying to make it work with certain guys, some veterans like Carlos Dunlap in the past. They also drafted LJ Collier in round 1 a few years ago. Some things just haven't panned out the way that maybe they would hope it would. Bradley Chubb, I think, would be a really nice buy acquisition for them right now. I'm not exactly sure what his value would be. I would think a round 2 selection is kind of what would get the deal done just with how Denver's played this year. Now, the strength of their team has been their defense, so I'm not sure that Denver's in love with the idea of selling Bradley Chubb, but I think they're at least listening to offers right now. The Atlanta Falcons, another team like Seattle, they've been hunting for the pass rushers they just haven't really gotten the production from them in recent memory. I think Bradley Chubb would be one of the best edge rushers they could acquire at this point. And then the Baltimore Ravens as well. We saw them bring in JPP because Odafe Oweh just hasn't lived up to kind of where they drafted him up to this point. I think Oweh could definitely still take strides forward. He was a little raw coming out of college. So if they got Bradley Chubb, I could see them using him a lot this year in hopes that, hey, maybe Oweh continues to improve and we try and figure out what we're doing with Bradley Chubb later. But I think those are the teams that would be interested in Chubb. Again, I don't think Chubb gets moved, but I think there's going to be a lot of listening on, offers between Denver and some other teams. We'll see what George Paton does there with the Broncos. And then Jerry Jeudy, I love him as an option here to buy for some teams. The Tennessee Titans, I think, again, no Treylon Burks here. Obviously, they have Robert Woods. We've seen them be active in the wide receiver market. They traded away A.J. Brown, brought in Robert Woods, drafted Treylon Burks. They've made a lot of moves at the wide receiver position. I think Jerry Jeudy would be a really nice acquisition for them as well. Gives you a different style receiver than what Treylon Burks is. Both of them good after the catch, but in different ways. The Ravens, I still think need another wide receiver. They drafted around one guy a few years ago in Rashad Bateman. I really like his play style, and I think Jerry Jeudy would be another guy. If you have him on short routes, he can make some stuff happen after the catch, but we've also seen him be able to stretch the field a little bit. The Jacksonville Jaguars, I think, would be a sneaky team to come in and get him. We saw them pay big money for Christian Kirk. I think it was well worth it. We've seen him produce for them for the most part this year, especially early in the season. Now it's going to be important that he continues to produce for them down the stretch, but I think bringing another receiver of Jerry Jeudy's caliber could help open up the field for Kirk in other ways too. And then the Minnesota Vikings, I like KJ Osborne a lot as a 3 there. But Jerry Jeudy's a significant upgrade, especially with where Adam Thielen's at in his career. He's still been productive. I still think Adam Thielen's a good player. I went to the same college as Adam Thielen. Roll Mavs. But at the end of the day, the Minnesota Vikings getting Jerry Jeudy would make a lot of sense. For Jeudy, I think probably a round 2 selection as well would get the deal done. Maybe round 3 and round 4 picks instead of a round 2 selection if teams are a little skeptical of giving up a top 45-ish pick. I could see that being what it takes to get Jeudy off the Broncos roster. Now looking at candidate number 5, this is one we've already talked about in the previous video, but it's edge Brian Burns from the Carolina Panthers. And the reason I bring him up again in this video, the Panthers reportedly, now this was reported on Twitter, received an offer of 2 first-round picks. There was not a team specified in that. My guess is it would be the Philadelphia Eagles. They have 2 first-round picks this year, one from the New Orleans Saints and their own first. They're the team that naturally makes the most sense here. I thought that they would have the most interest in Burns because of how well they played this year at a 6-0 record. Adding a player like Burns could really be a statement for your team on, hey, we think we're going to make noise this year in the postseason and maybe we could win it. If the Eagles ultimately don't get something done here for Brian Burns, I don't think it's the end of the world because that Saints pick might be pretty valuable for them. And who knows, maybe they have the ammo to move up for a Will Anderson. Maybe they have the ammo to get something done on draft night that no one's expecting, right? But they've got all the infrastructure there in place that Brian Burns could be the guy that does push them over the top, which is it's going to be a tough conversation for them to have of, do we really want to go all in on this guy? Do we want to hold some of our future flexibility while still being really good? It's a tough question, but for Carolina's perspective, I am shocked that they did not accept this offer. If this was an actual legitimate offer, if I'm getting 2 first-round picks for Brian Burns, I'm pulling the trigger on that if I'm Carolina. There's so many holes on this team. Yes, I like the idea of Brian Burns being a staple of your franchise. I completely agree with that. I think he's got the talent to ultimately be that for them the next 4 to 7 years. But at the same time, having one elite edge rusher and a good D tackle in Derek Brown, and yeah, you have a good wide receiver in DJ Moore, those 3 guys combined are going to win you 4 to 5 games a year if you don't have other stuff around them. I think that really tearing this thing down, and the trade I look at the most, the New York Jets, when they gave up Jamal Adams to the Seattle Seahawks for 2 first-round picks, that was a franchise-altering decision by Joe Douglas for the New York Jets, and it was one that was a really good decision. And I think the Panthers here, if they are able to get 2 first-round picks for Brian Burns, again, it's a franchise-altering decision, and I think it's in a positive way, where maybe you have some really good draft selections here, especially if they're able to get that Saints pick from the Eagles. That could be a top 10 to 15 pick. And if you have your own pick in the top 5, top 3 likely, and you have another top 10 pick with it, you're in business cooking. And if you get an extra first from Philadelphia this year, maybe you trade that one down into a couple seconds and a third, and you're able to maybe on draft night, the first 2 nights of the draft, you're able to add 7 or 8 positional players that are starters for you by next season. That could be really good for that franchise. I think that they need to pull the trigger on a Brian Burns trade If it's 2 first-round picks or more, I think the deal's got to get done. I said I would be reluctant on it for a first. I don't think I would ultimately make that move, but if it's 2 firsts, sign me up. I'm trading a defensive player for 2 first-round picks nearly every single time. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Let me know in the comment section what you think about some of these players, if you see them getting traded or not. Give me some other trade ideas in the comment section as well. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content here at Utility Sports as well. Again, thanks so much for watching. We'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.